www.offthecorner.net. You're watching the Fact Project here on the DJ Tiger channel. Shout out to DJ Tiger. FACT, of course, is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African-Centered Thought. The goal here on the Fact Project is to convey some thoughts and some information to members of our community. I want to first start by saying, everyone watching this, we ask that you please like, share, and subscribe to the DJ Tiger channel so that we can continue to bring you all of the programming that is brought to you here on the DJ Tiger channel. If you like it, most definitely like, share, and subscribe to the DJ Tiger channel. FACT, I did say that. FACT is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African-Centered Thought. The goal here on the FACT Project is to convey some facts and some information to members of our community. For those of you who may be watching us for the first time. Today is the 100th birth anniversary of the great Omowale Malcolm X. And he's referred to as Omowale because in some of his trips to Africa, which is not really spoken about as much as I believe it should be, when he went to Nigeria, he was given the name Omowale, which means the child has returned. Of course, Malcolm X embraced at some point Sunni Islam after leaving the Nation of Islam, and he took the name El Haj Malik Shabazz. El Haj Malik Shabazz is an Arabic name, and I think if we're trying to reconnect with our cultural heritage as African people, we want to have African names. That's always a part of culture, names and what you call yourself and so forth. So instead of saying El Haj Malik Shabazz, I say Omowale Malcolm X, because this was the name he was given. I'm trying to pull up a picture here of Malcolm X as I'm speaking. Don't know why that's a problem, but either way, if you hear me refer to him as Omowale Malcolm X and you don't know what that means, now you know. So coming up in the 80s, a lot of us, people who were into rap music, hip hop music, our entrance point into knowledge of self was not only just hip hop music, but it was also Malcolm X. Malcolm X was like that fuse that lit the fire for many of us as it relates to having knowledge of ourselves. And so Malcolm X becomes important in the not only the history of America as it relates to the struggle for people of African heritage in America, but Malcolm X was also that individual that inspired the Black Power movement, which began in 1963. Began in 1966. So this is maybe a year subsequent to his assassination. So Malcolm X did not live to see the Black Power movement get started. And I see a few people coming in. Put an X in the chat if Malcolm X had an impact on your life in any way. Today we're talking about the life and legacy of the great Omowale Malcolm X on the 100th birthday anniversary of his birth. Either way, Malcolm X also inspired the consciousness and hip hop movement of the late 1980s. I think Public Enemy, under the leadership of Chuck D and Professor Griff, introduced Malcolm X to us as people that are into hip hop. And forgive me, I don't want to say I'm not prepared. I just I'm kind of winging this right now. So shout out to Mo Better One in the chat. Put an X in the chat. saying that Malcolm X had an impact on his life. So salute to Mo Better One. But it's interesting that when the consciousness and hip hop movement came about in the late 80s, it was in part inspired by Malcolm X. And Malcolm X had been gone maybe 25 years at that point. Cornell Sutton in the chat put an X in the chat. Salute to everybody putting an X in the chat. And that's for anyone watching. If Malcolm X had an impact on your life in any way, put an X in the chat. So Malcolm X inspired the consciousness and hip hop movement, which is 25 years subsequent to his being taken out. Clarence Bell Jr., shout out, put an X in the chat. Anybody watching, if Malcolm X had an impact on your life in any way, put an X in the chat. So now my personal journey, I learned about Malcolm X maybe when I was about 15 years old. I have an older brother who got his hands on the autobiography of Malcolm X. I don't know if this was an assignment for school or if this is something he, came upon on his own. Either way, him and I shared a room years ago when we were coming up. And he had the book. It was in the room. My mother came in the room and she saw the book. And she said, "Oh, you're reading about Malcolm X?" And he said, "Yes." And so they had a little conversation back and forth about Malcolm X. I had no idea who that was. I had never heard the name before. I saw the cover of the book, and it was not the most recent re-release of the autobiography of Malcolm X, which looks like this now. It was more of like artwork. It was a painting of Malcolm X. So I'm seeing an individual on the cover wearing a suit, tie. He's talking in front of a microphone. So I'm figuring, okay, he's like Martin Luther King. So I'm not really paying my full attention to this whole Malcolm X thing. I didn't pick up the book. I didn't, I really had no interest in it. So my brother, who was in high school at the time, he came upon a Malcolm X vinyl record. Back then in libraries, you have vinyl records of, let's say, a JFK speech. And you play side one, and then you flip the record over to side B, listen to the rest of the speech, right? So he got his hands on this record. Now, he was a teenager at the time. He's older than me. I'm not old enough to have a job. He was. So he worked on the weekends. Saturday, he was gone all day. Now, him and I, like I said, we shared a room. We had a stereo. Now, I wasn't old enough to work, so I didn't have records of my own. So any records we had was the records that he bought. And so he would leave. He was gone all day Saturday, and he didn't want me to touch his records. Obviously, he didn't want me to scratch his records. But after he leaves for work, and I know he's going to be gone all day, I'm a little brother. What am I going to do? I'm going to play his records, right? So the Malcolm X record was there. And I'm playing records. I'm enjoying myself until I got bored with that. And then I looked at the Malcolm X record just sitting there. I said, okay, let me put this Malcolm X on. Let me see what this is about. I'm thinking this is like some kind of Martin Luther King type of thing. And when I dropped the needle and I heard him speak, I was completely blown away. Like that needle drop, that changed my life. And from then on, for me, it was a pursuit to get everything I could get as it relates to Malcolm X. Back then, it was VHS tapes. Back then, it was cassette tapes. Back then, maybe it was books. Either way, this is that vinyl record right here. It's called Malcolm X by Any Means Necessary. And yeah, it's a piece of vinyl. And by the way, I made sure, if you get a good look at that, I kept that in mint condition all these years. I had this for about 40 years now. Kept that in absolute mint condition. Still have the record. Don't want to say how it was acquired and why I still have it. That's another conversation. Either way, Autobiography of Malcolm X tells the story of Malcolm X, who didn't have the kind of start that Martin Luther King had. We compared it to Martin Luther King's family was in the church. They were leadership in the church. Church always generates a lot of money. And so his family had money. They were Black Republicans. Martin Luther King went to Morehouse College and seminary school, and he had money to go to school. Malcolm X, and none of us couldn't necessarily relate to that. Malcolm X was a hustler in the street. He sold drugs. He robbed houses. He went to prison. This was the individual that we can relate to more because we didn't come up as Black Republicans with money, going to colleges and universities. So there's something in the story of Malcolm X that resonated with us. And so at that point, I'm starting to get my hands on all things Malcolm X. Now, there was another book entitled Malcolm X Speaks. This is also a re-release. I grew up in a house where I had this, and this was by my bedside as a teenager coming up. This is not the original version. This is a re-release with a different cover. But Malcolm X Speaks is a lot of the pivotal and important speeches that was given by Malcolm X at the height of his public stature and his national public life. Many years later, we going now into the early 1990s. I got my hands on this book right here. It's called Malcolm X, the FBI File. And it's not a small book. It's a pretty big book, but it's no secret that the FBI and the J. Edgar Hoover not only infiltrated Malcolm X and his inner circle, but they also infiltrated his personal life, his organization, and just everything had to do with him because they saw Malcolm X as a threat. Shout out to Def Rock in the chat. He said Malcolm X was the Taurus like me, May 3rd. So shout out to all those people that were born in May. And then Clarence Bell Jr. said that Mom Dukes had it in the house. Now I have it. Grew up during those times too. Okay, so shout out to Clarence Bell Jr. He knows exactly the period of time that I'm talking about. Either way, like I said, I still have a lot of the old VHS tapes that I collected on Malcolm X. Cassette tapes, because back then, if you lived in New York, if you go to Brooklyn on the weekend, you would find, vendors on the sidewalk selling cassettes. Sometimes it was mixtapes. Sometimes it was tapes of Malcolm X. And so I bought some of those Malcolm X tapes, and some of those are rare. That's stuff that that's not even on the internet probably. I still have those tapes. I have to find them. Either way, the life of Malcolm X was played out in a movie done by Spike Lee, of course. And I hope I'm sharing my screen right here. The Spike Lee movie. No, I'm not sharing my screen, right? So I got it now. Spike Lee movie touched on a lot of things, but there were some things that were left out of the Spike Lee movie. So, for example, I mentioned that Malcolm X had went to different parts of Africa before he went on his pilgrimage that is now infamous. This was supposed to be the transformation of Malcolm X, him going on this pilgrimage to Mecca, to Saudi Arabia. Malcolm X, before that, went to Nigeria, he went to Kenya, he went to Tanzania. He met with sitting presidents of nations. This was the respect that Malcolm X had worldwide. So the Spike Lee movie does not touch on Pan-Africanism at all. The word is not mentioned at all. It mentions Marcus Garvey only because Malcolm X's parents were Garveyites. So Marcus Garvey had to be mentioned in the movie, but Pan-Africanism was not mentioned. And Malcolm X's trips to Africa before the Mecca trip was not mentioned. So now I found this biography of Malcolm X on a website called biography.com. A lot of things on here is very generic. It's very watered down. And I'm showing this only because I noticed something from the gate. It says, who was Malcolm X? It says Malcolm X was a minister, civil rights activist, and prominent Black nationalist leader who served as a spokesman for the Nation of Islam during the 1950s and 60s. So first thing wrong with that is the idea that they're saying Malcolm X was a civil rights leader. Malcolm X, out of his mouth, said, especially after he left the Nation of Islam, he said that he's a Black nationalist freedom fighter and that he was not fighting for civil rights. He was actually fighting for human rights. So I'm noticing now, many years after the fact, Malcolm X is being referred to as a civil rights leader. Civil rights leader for Malcolm X, that's a misnomer. Because Malcolm X always referred to himself as a human rights leader and a Black nationalist freedom fighter. It says, due largely to his efforts, the Nation of Islam grew from a mere 400 members at the time. He was released from prison in 1952 to 40,000 members by 1960. That's something we need to understand about the Nation of Islam. It was nothing before Malcolm X got involved with it. And it would have been nothing if Malcolm X never got involved with it. Now, it says they had 400 members nationwide. Most of those 400 members were senior citizens, and they were meeting in some raggedy places that, wasn't really much to speak of until Malcolm X gets involved. He's such a great orator. He's such a great public speaker. And he was able to convey the message in such a way that it resonated with people. And he was able to grow the Nation of Islam from 400 members to 40,000 by 1960. It says, a naturally gifted orator, Malcolm X exhorted Black people to cast off the shackles of racism by any means necessary, including violence. Now, I talked about in my book, F.A.C.T, which of course is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African-Centered Thought. I talk about the 6 jewels of self-sufficiency, which is food, clothes, shelter, education, medication, and self-defense. Sometimes, in an effort to defend yourself, you may have to exemplify an act of violence. This is something that was not popular to talk about, especially since the civil rights movement was kind of like this polished, squeaky clean movement of Black people that thought that freedom for Black people meant integrating into white America, which is the exact opposite of what we should have been doing. Years previous, Marcus Garvey put out the textbook, Complete Independence. Now, I learned over the years, because I spent a lot of time on this, in America, you had 2 movements of Black people: the civil rights movement and the Black Power, Black independence movement. Now, civil rights movement said freedom for Black people meant integrating into white society. So assimilation, be part of the American dream. They were not talking about creating an independent reality for Black people. These are people like the Urban League, the NAACP, civil rights movement. Their goal was integrating. Now, on the other side of that, you had the Black Power movement, the Black independence movement that said that freedom for Black people comes when we create an independent reality for ourselves. Freedom for us is not sitting on a public toilet next to other people and integrating lunch counters and so forth. And so Dr. Uhuru Hotep, and shout out to him, we need to bring him back on. He said years ago, and something I had to think about, he said, if you're Black in America, you're one of 2 things. You're either an integrationist, assimilationist, or you're a Pan-African Black nationalist. I had to think about that. And that's actually true. Any movement of Black people you can point to, whether it's the Christian Church, Nation of Islam, Sunni Islam, and any number of other groups, most of them are not talking about Black life. Life is LIFE, liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment for Black people. Many of them are trying to basically just get a more comfortable seat in the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. So people that promoted this idea of independence and doing for self were people like Martin Delany, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, high on that list. It says, due largely to his efforts, the Nation of Islam grew from 400 members to 40,000 members by 1960. Naturally a gifted orator, Malcolm X exhorted Black people to cast off the shackles of racism by any means necessary, including violence. The fiery civil rights leader, there we go again with the misnomer, because he was not a civil rights leader, but I'm reading what it says. The fiery civil rights leader broke with the Nation of Islam shortly before his assassination in 1965 at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City, where he was preparing to deliver a speech. He was 39 years old. Now, what he was going to say that day in that speech, I'm going to see if I can touch on that a little bit today. But we're going to keep going on the life of Malcolm X. Again, if you're just joining us, put an X in the chat if Malcolm X had an impact on your life. Def Rocker said Elijah Muhammad made Malcolm X a minister while he was in jail and was the first one to do so. I don't know if he was made a minister in jail. I know he was exposed to the teachings by his family when he was in prison. But he was made. I would have to look that up. I'm not clear on that one, so I'm not going to challenge that either way. He said my father drove Malcolm X around when he visited Temple Number 5 in Newark. Interesting. That Temple Number 5 becomes a problem towards the end, but we come back to Temple Number 25. Shout out to Def Rock. It says his father drove Malcolm X. That's interesting. Wow. Salute to you, brother. You got that history. I like that. Anyway, it says Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little on May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the fourth of eight 8 children born to Louise, a homemaker, and Earl Little, a preacher, who was also an active member of the local chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and an avid supporter of Black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey. So a lot of what Malcolm X learned, Elijah Muhammad gets credit for that. But Malcolm X did learn a lot from his father, and he learned a lot from the Garvey movement. And he can recall as a small child, not even 10 years old, his father would take him to UNIA meetings. So this fiery revolutionary spirit that Malcolm X had, that began early. That began years before Elijah Muhammad even stepped on the scene. And Elijah Muhammad, by the way, was a member of the Garvey movement in Detroit. And so Elijah Muhammad is learning a lot from Marcus Garvey. That's something Nation of Islam, they skip over that. They always want to give the credit to Elijah Muhammad. It says, due to Earl Little's civil rights activism, I think he was more of a Pan-Africanist and a Black nationalist and a civil rights activist, but this is biography.com giving the story. The family was subjected to frequent harassment from white supremacist groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, who I call the Cuckoo Klan. They wear the dunce hat. And one of its splinter groups, the Black Legion. In fact, Malcolm Little had his first encounter with racism before he was even born. He says, quote, when my mother was pregnant with me, she told me later, a party of hooded Ku Klux Klan riders galloped up to our home. Malcolm later remembered brandishing their shotguns and rifles. They shouted for my father to come out. So now this is white domestic terrorists terrorizing the Little family because of their involvement with the Garvey movement. There's no Elijah Muhammad on the scene yet. Noble Drew Ali might have been on the scene, but I don't think he had the impact that Garvey had. The harassment continued when Malcolm was 4 years old. A local Klan member smashed all of the family's windows. To protect his family, Earl Little moved them from Omaha to Milwaukee in 1926, and then to Lansing, Michigan in 1928. Again, if you're just joining us, we're talking about the 100th birth anniversary of the great Omar Wali Malcolm X. And Variety put an X in the chat saying that Malcolm X had that impact. So now I'm going to continue. However, the racism the family encountered in Lansing, because he moved to Lansing, Michigan in 1926, proved even greater than in Omaha. Shortly after the Littles moved in, a racist mob set their house on fire in 1929, and the town's all-white emergency responders refused to do anything. So this is Malcolm X, his earliest memories and his earliest encounters with white people, who many of our Black psychologists refer to as psychopaths. Now, you say psychopath, a person might think, hey, you're just saying somebody's crazy. But if you drill down the definition of psychopath is defined as someone who exemplifies antisocial behavior. And that antisocial behavior on occasion is accompanied by violence. This is what Malcolm X and his family are experiencing at the hands of white Americans. It says, quote, the white police and firemen came and stood around watching as the house burned to the ground. Malcolm later remembered Earl moved the family to East Lansing, where he built a new home. So this is a family being burned out of their home because of their connection, affiliation, and involvement in the Garvey movement. I can keep going on that, but I want to go to some videos. There's some that I found to be interesting. Def Rocker said there's a video from Imam Abdul Karim Hassan from LA that mentions Malcolm was made a minister. Okay, interesting. Okay, I missed that. Thank you for that. Def Rocker, salute. Adding on. I appreciate that. I will have to go ahead and look that up. I appreciate that. So let me see here. We got. All right, so this is for. Well, before I do that, let me do this. We're talking about the 100th birthday anniversary of Malcolm X, and I'm seriously doing this on the fly, so I need everybody to bear with me. But again, if you're just joining us, put an X in the chat if Malcolm X had an impact on your life. We're talking about the 100th birth anniversary of the great Omawali Malcolm X. Now, this is a video I found. I thought this was interesting, so I'm going to go ahead and share this. I'm going to pause where necessary to go ahead and make the points that I need to make. We got a few people in the chat chiming in. We got Ross Gore, hopefully I'm saying that right, put an X in the chat. And Corey McClevey, hope I'm saying that right. Shout out to everybody putting an X in the chat. But here we go. This is called Who Was Malcolm X?
Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself who taught you to hate being what God gave you.
Okay, so there he's talking about self-hate, which is something that is facilitated in the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. Most Black people in America do not have knowledge of self, and that's for three reasons. Number one is the public school, disinformation in the public school. Two is disinformation in the media. Now we can add a layer to that and talk about social media. And number three is disinformation in religious institutions, in the church, which comes complete with white God and white Jesus. So this is Malcolm X talking about who taught you to hate yourself.
How did one man go from petty criminal to becoming a global voice against racism? He's one of the most prominent Muslims in modern history and a symbol of Black liberation who has inspired generations. A gangster, a preacher, and a revolutionary, this is the extraordinary journey of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was born in 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. His parents, Earl and Louise Little, were followers of the Pan-African activist Marcus Garvey. As a result, their family was subjected to constant harassment by the Ku Klux Klan, who burned down their home when Malcolm was just 4 years old. The family moved to Michigan, where they were threatened by the Black Legion, an offshoot of the KKK. 4 of Malcolm's uncles were also murdered by white racists. Malcolm's father died when he was 6. The incident was officially ruled a streetcar accident, although his mother believed he had ultimately been murdered by the Black Legion. When Malcolm was 13, his mother was committed to a mental institution. Her children were split up and sent to different foster homes. Malcolm was an excellent student, but dropped out of school after a white teacher told him it was unrealistic for a young Black boy to have aspirations of being a lawyer.
Now, stop there. I think if Malcolm X had stayed in school and became an attorney, he would have been a brilliant attorney.
After a few years in Michigan and Boston, he moved to Harlem at the age of 18, where he was involved in gambling, robbery, drug dealing, and pimping. At the age of 21, after committing a string of robberies with a small gang in Boston, Malcolm was arrested and sentenced to 8 to 10 years at Charlestown State Prison.
Now, this is Malcolm X coming away now from the Garvey teachings that he learned from his father. He's getting involved in the street life, and then he gets locked up.
Incarceration was the beginning of Malcolm's transformation. While in prison, his siblings began writing to him about the Nation of Islam and its leader, Elijah Muhammad. The Nation of Islam promoted Black independence and rejected the notion of the superiority of white people.
Now, stop right there. They're saying the Nation of Islam did that. Everything Elijah Muhammad did as it relates to the Nation of Islam, minus teaching the religion of Islam, he learned from the Garvey movement. Everything down to the FOI, everything down to people referring to him as honorable. Marcus Garvey's movement referred to Marcus Garvey as the honorable Marcus Garvey. So that's a lot of what the Nation of Islam did, minus the religion of Islam. They're basically learning and copying from the Garvey movement.
Instead, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers a form of separatism from whites, who were actually considered devils, inferior to Black people, who were the original inhabitants of Earth. Malcolm, initially hostile to the idea of any religion, eventually became a member of the nation. He read books constantly and began writing regularly to Elijah Muhammad. Muhammad's followers were taught to abandon their given family names, as they were actually the names of former slave owners. So Malcolm Little became Malcolm X. After being paroled, Malcolm visited Elijah Muhammad in Chicago. In June the next year, he was named Assistant Minister of the Nation of Islam's Temple No. 1 in Detroit. He later established Boston's Temple No. 11 and expanded Temple No. 12 in Philadelphia.
And those of you who think that you perhaps came here to hear us tell you to turn the other cheek to the brutality of the white man, I say again, you came to the wrong place.
Finally, he was selected to lead Temple No. 7 in Harlem, where he was responsible for a huge surge in membership.
We don't teach you to turn the other cheek. We don't teach you to turn the other cheek in the South, and we don't teach you to turn the other cheek in the North. We teach you to obey the law. We teach you to carry yourselves in a respectable way. But at the same time, we teach you that anyone who puts his hand on you, do your best to see that he doesn't put it on anybody else.
Okay, now that's totally different from what the civil rights movement was saying, turn the other cheek. He's talking about violence as it relates to self-defense. He's not saying commit an act of aggression against anyone. He said if someone puts their hands on you, you might have to exemplify some violence to defend yourself, your family, your property, or whatever the case might be.
The FBI now had him under surveillance due to his sudden profile as the nation's rising star. Malcolm's rise to national prominence happened in 1957, when he intervened at a police station to arrange for medical assistance and legal help for members of the nation who had been beaten and arrested by New York police. The crowd of protesters outside grew to almost 4,000. Witnessing Malcolm's control of the crowd shook the New York Police Department. Within weeks, they had him under surveillance and officially began infiltrating the nation. In 1958, Malcolm married his wife Betty, with whom he would have 6 daughters. Malcolm's profile continued to grow via print and television appearances, and he began to gain international exposure.
Now, a lot of people who were in the Nation of Islam before Malcolm X got there, they started to have a problem with the fact that he's being portrayed in the media now. The media is coming after him to do interviews and ask him questions, and he's now becoming the face of an organization that existed before he got there, but it didn't have the prominence that it got after he helped to promote it. And some of those people had an issue with the fact that he's now becoming more popular than not only the people that were already there, but the whole organization.
Who is it that controls the prostitution in Harlem? It's the white man. Who controls the large sale of whiskey and wine? It's the white man. Who gives you the deck of cards and the dice that you use to gamble with? It's the white man. And after he sell them to you, he catch you with them and put you in jail for using them.
He was deeply critical of the growing civil rights movement and its leaders, like Dr. Martin Luther King, who preached integration.
That's what you mean by nonviolence. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. 100 years ago, they used to put on a white sheet and use a bloodhound against Negroes. Today, they have taken off the white sheet and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing. And just as Uncle Tom, back during slavery, used to keep the Negroes from resisting the bloodhound or resisting the Ku Klux Klan by teaching them to love their enemy, Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom or a religious Uncle Tom who is doing the same thing today.
Malcolm's message was being heard louder than ever, but his relationship with the man who had transformed his life was about to fracture. Tensions were growing within the nation over the amount of attention Malcolm was receiving compared to his mentor, Elijah Muhammad. An unprovoked raid on a Nation of Islam mosque by police in Los Angeles led to one member being paralyzed and another being killed. No charges were laid against the police.
The white man believes you when you go to him with that old sweet talk, because you've been sweet talking him ever since he brought you here. Stop sweet talking. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
Malcolm was reportedly stunned by Elijah Muhammad's refusal to allow any form of response or retaliation for the incident.
Okay, so now here is where the split between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X begins. Nation of Islam talked about the white man is the devil, the white man is your oppressor, but they were not willing to engage in any act of resistance against who they referred to as the devil. Malcolm X was more revolutionary. He's getting out in the street. He's taking on police brutality, so forth and so on. So he wants to get more involved in activism, where Elijah Muhammad wanted to kind of just be a little bit kind of passive, kind of docile, kind of just focusing on religion and not necessarily getting involved in too much activism in the street. And so this is where the split now begins to occur between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad.
The two also disagreed over Malcolm's desire to begin working with civil rights organizations, black politicians, and other religious organizations. Then, suddenly,
here is a bulletin from CBS News. 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. President Kennedy has been seriously wounded.
Malcolm's response to the Kennedy assassination led to him being officially silenced for 90 days.
Malcolm X, you were involved in a controversy some months ago with your leader. Is that over?
Well, I've been silent for the past 90 days because of some statements I made concerning the President of the United States, which were distorted. They were distorted. And yes.
What did you say, Malcolm?
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing.
In March of 1964, Malcolm publicly announced his break from the Nation of Islam. He also expressed a desire to work with other civil rights leaders, saying that Elijah Muhammad had prevented him from doing so. Then came a bombshell.
Well, in reality, I never even left the Muslim movement. They put me out. And they put me out because of what I knew. And what I knew was told to me by Mr. Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad himself. They put me out and they put him out.
Who is the father of all of these various children whom you have enumerated?
The first one to tell me who the father was Wallace Muhammad, and he told me that the father was Elijah Muhammad himself.
And how many of these illegitimate children did he father with the sisters?
Well, he made 6 sisters pregnant. They all had children. 2 of those 6 had 2 children. I am told that there is a 7th sister who is supposed to be in Mexico right now, and she's supposed to be having a child by him.
Are you not perhaps afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
After splitting from the nation, Malcolm began learning the tenets and practices of Sunni Islam. He founded the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, a religious organization, and the Organization of Afro-American Unity, a non-religious group promoting Pan-Africanism. He had softened his position on Martin Luther King, who he met only once in person. And later the same year, he performed Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca.
Again, focusing on the pilgrimage to Mecca, totally skipping over the other trips to Africa that included trips to Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, and so forth. Meeting with sitting presidents of nations, they go to this piece about the trip to Mecca.
This was to be yet another transformative experience for him.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps it could do the same thing for him.
After Mecca, Malcolm made 2 trips to Africa, meeting officials and speaking on radio and television across the continent. In Cairo, he attended the second meeting of the Organization of African Unity and met Africa's most high-profile leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and Ahmed Ben Bella of Algeria, who all offered him official positions in their respective governments. He met with Fidel Castro and was one of the first African-American leaders to meet the newly created Palestinian Liberation Organization, and was one of the pioneers of a tradition of Black Palestinian solidarity that would be continued by the Black Panther Party and the Black Lives Matter movement. A common misconception about Malcolm's philosophical evolution is that his process of turning to Sunni Islam softened his political positions. While it's true that Malcolm abandoned some of the nation's more extreme separatist positions on race, he remained a staunch black nationalist.
I think what a lot of people are interested in, Malcolm,
Remained a staunch black nationalist. Listen.
is whether this experience has made you feel that your feelings have changed, that the animosity you have expressed in the past toward all fights.
There's one thing that I want to make clear. No matter how much respect, no matter how much recognition whites show toward me, as far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me.
If anything, Malcolm's travel had led him to globalize his perspective, seeing black liberation as something beyond the United States, and as something that was intimately tied to struggle.
Seeing black liberation as something beyond the United States. A lot of people are stuck in one gear. They can't think beyond the United States. You've got someone in the chat, who I'm not even going to mention by name, is telling me that I'm wrong. And they seem to be trying to promote Noble Drew Ali. I would ask that individual, what is the greatest problem we're faced with as black people in America? If you're caping for Noble Drew Ali, then maybe you think you're a Moor. Call yourself what you will. The question says, what is the greatest problem we're faced with? Respond to that, and then we'll go from there. And I'm not going to debate the obvious, because if I do now, that gets me off track. But that's a question for the person in the chat that's saying some negative about what I'm saying. Listen.
Struggles for independence across the third world
has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over.
Bang, he's talking now about Pan-Africanism. I say this on the Fact Project all the time. As people of African heritage, there's strength in numbers. We will always be stronger together than we will ever be separated and apart from each other. And we have people power, but we don't understand people power because we're not organized. And organized people can do anything. And working together works. So for those people that want to split us up into different groups and say that somehow black people in America are something different than the rest of the world, that's your enemy putting that narrative out for you to repeat, to divide us, which makes us weak. That's been a strategy in the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. And a lot of people are gullible and they're falling for it. This is Malcolm X now taking the struggle international and exemplifying the idea of Pan-Africanism, something that was promoted before him by the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey. Listen.
In that struggle. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem.
If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change.
The Nation of Islam had not taken Malcolm's exit and public criticism of Elijah Muhammad's misconduct lightly. His family was repeatedly threatened, their car was bombed, and FBI surveillance records show that law enforcement was aware that elements within the nation were openly discussing his death.
Okay, now stop right there. Two things I can tell you for sure about religious people. Remember, Nation of Islam is a religious organization. Two things I can tell you for certain about religious people. Religious people have blind obeisance to religious doctrine and theology, no matter how far-flung, ridiculous, and absurd it is. The second thing is religious people have blind obeisance to religious leaders, to the point where if you said anything adverse about the religious leader, there would be a line of people wanting to physically kill you. This is what Malcolm X is beginning to experience at this point. Religious zealots, I don't even know what you would call that, but people that are so religious and so brainwashed by the religion, which is based on absurd theology, that they would want to kill somebody that said anything adverse about the religion or the religious leader. Listen.
Then his house was burned down. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm was addressing the Organization of Afro-American Unity in Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom. He was shot 21 times. 3 Nation of Islam members were tried and convicted of the murder, but questions remained. At the time of his death, Malcolm was under surveillance by both the NYPD and the FBI's COINTELPRO operation. For many, there is simply no doubt that one or both organizations had a hand in his assassination. Malcolm's legacy went on to be preserved in hip-hop, film, and literature, Most importantly, his own autobiography, which continues to be celebrated and was named one of the 10 most influential non-fiction books of the 20th century. His politics continue to inspire generations of activism against racism and imperialism worldwide.
People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Malcolm's funeral was held in Harlem. Some estimate that up to 30,000 people attended. Actor and activist Ossie Davis delivered the eulogy.
Harlem has come to bid farewell to one of its brightest hopes, extinguished now and gone from us forever. Many will ask what Harlem finds to honor in this stormy, controversial, and bold young captain. And we will smile. Many will say, turn away, away from this man, for he is not a man, but a demon, a monster, a subverter, and an enemy of the black man. And we will answer and say unto them, did you ever talk to Brother Malcolm? Did you ever touch him or have him smile at you? Did you ever really listen to him? Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood. This was his meaning to his people. And in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. What we place in the ground is no more now a man, but a seed, which, after the winter of discontent, will come forth again to meet us. And we shall know him then for what he was and is, a prince, our own black shining prince, who did not hesitate to die because he loved us so.
You now use Shabazz and drop X?
I'll probably continue to use Malcolm X and I'll probably use it as long as the situation that produced it exists.
That was brilliant. That was the great Omar Wally Malcolm X. Now, the assassination at the Audubon Ballroom took place on a day where Malcolm X was going to address his followers and talk about where Elijah Muhammad was getting a lot of his funding from. This is interesting because that little piece that I just played did not mention this idea of the Nation of Islam being funded by a one Mr. H.L. Hunt, who was a billionaire in the state of Texas. Okay, here we go. I think this is Omar Shabazz. Yeah, here we go. So I'm gonna play this real quick. Let's share my screen right quick. This is one thing Malcolm X did not get a chance to mention before they took him down. And this was going to be mentioned that day at the Audubon Ballroom. He spoke to it briefly before that. But the day of the assassination at the Audubon Ballroom, he was going to go in. And he didn't get a chance to do that. So here we go. I'm sharing my screen. This is filmmaker Omar Shabazz. See if I can skip forward a little bit because he likes to put some humor in his filmmaking. Let's get past the humor and get to the real deal.
6 years ago, a black separatist religious leader named Elijah Muhammad, who led a group called the Nation of Islam. We worked hard on that film. We knew it was going to be a thriller. And then it happened.
He's talking about
But
how
has
his computer went down. Here we go.
Muhammad was briefly covered. The relationship with H.L. Hunt and Elijah Muhammad was briefly covered on February 15, 1965, just days before Malcolm X would be assassinated. Malcolm only tapped on it lightly, but planned to completely break it down on February 21st, 1965.
Tapped on it lightly, but planned to completely break it down on February 21st, 1965.
According to Earl Grant and Robert L. Higgins, two of Malcolm's close associates. Grant and Higgins informed filmmaker Shabazz that Malcolm was going to prove that H.L. Hunt owned Elijah Muhammad and the 1965 version of the Nation of Islam. If Malcolm was allowed to speak in more detail about how Elijah Muhammad was able to maintain 2 large mansions, 2 automobiles, several apartment complexes, keep up on the rent and maintenance of dozens of temples throughout America, plus pay his ministers and laborers a monthly fee, a whole lot of receipts would have to be shown. Elijah was hitting Malcolm off alone with $1,000 a month. Here's Malcolm speaking on H.L. Hunt and Elijah.
And I guess many of you have heard it said that his financial support comes from a rich man in Texas. I heard that while I was in the movement. I've heard it more since I left the movement. A rich man in Texas. You can look up, any of you can look up his name. But the FBI knows that too. But they still don't touch him. And never have I seen a man, and this rich man who lives in Texas, by the way, lives in Dallas. His headquarters in Dallas. His money is in Dallas. The same cities where President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And never have I seen a man in my life more afraid, more frightened than Elijah Muhammad was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I've never in my life seen a man as frightened as he was. And when
Now he's making a link between H.L. Hunt and the assassination of JFK. H.L. Hunt lives in Dallas. JFK was assassinated in Dallas. He's alluding to the idea that Elijah Muhammad knew that H.L. Hunt had something to do with the assassination of JFK, which is why Elijah Muhammad had such a huge problem with Malcolm X saying that the chickens came home to roost after the president was shot and killed. Listen.
I made the statement that I did, while he almost cracked up behind it, because there were all kinds of implications to it that at that time were way above and beyond my understanding.
You see, if Malcolm said it, damn it, then it's the truth.
Stop right there. Malcolm said it's the truth. Malcolm said that he heard this in the Nation of Islam when he was involved with it, and there was some talk of it even back then. There's any number of different directions that I can go into, but I do want to do this, though. The influence that Malcolm X has had on hip-hop is exceptional. So I do want to play a piece. Here we go. That's it. I do want to play part of a lecture that Malcolm X did called Message to the Grassroots. This is one of his more popular speeches. And forgive me for taking long. Okay, so I'm doing this on the fly. And they're giving me commercial. Jamming me up. Stay with me. Here we go. All right, so this is, we're going to share this. This is Malcolm X from a speech called Message to the Grassroots. I'm showing here now the connection between hip hop music and the voice of Malcolm X. Listen.
And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me, us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand. We all agree tonight, all of the speakers have agreed that America has a very serious problem. Not only does America have a very serious problem, but our people have a very serious problem. America's problem is us.
Okay, we're going to stop right there. America's problem is us. Now, where did we hear that before? If we can jog our memories, we can recall that a bunch of artists came together under the direction of a one Mr. KRS-One, and they did a record called Self-Destruction. Self-Destruction used the voice of Malcolm X at the beginning of the record to open the record because this was trendy at the time. This was made popular, of course, by Public Enemy, who did it for the first time on Rebel Without a Pause. And then there was an individual years ago in maybe 1984, Keith LeBlanc. He did a record that used the voice of Malcolm X. That was probably the first time I heard Malcolm X on record. But here we go. This is the beginning of Self-Destruction.
We all agree tonight, all of the speakers have agreed that America has a very serious problem. Not only does America have a very serious problem, but our people have a very serious problem. America's problem is self-destruction.
Okay, so we see there where Malcolm X is having an impact on hip-hop music and hip-hop culture. Now, the next thing I want to mention is the fact that Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam. He was very adamant about promoting the concept of Black nationalism. Black nationalism, a lot of people may hear that, but they can't put a definition to it. Black nationalism is a social, political, and economic cooperation of Black people nationwide. Black nationalism is actually an ideology that is in opposition to systemic white supremacy. This is Malcolm X speaking to this idea of Black nationalism.
Malcolm called for churches and civil rights organizations to form a united front with the Muslims against police brutality.
Let us remember that we are not brutalized because we're Baptists. We're not brutalized because we're Methodists. We're not brutalized because we're Muslims. We're not brutalized because we're Catholics. We're brutalized because we are Black people in America.
Now, I just played the wrong clip, but I'm glad I played that because he's saying they're not hating on you because you're Baptist or you're Methodist, but because you're Black in America. This is for the people that are saying that they are not African and somehow they're ADOS and FBA. They're not hating on you because of what you call yourself. They hating you because you're Black in America. A lot of people are not getting that. Okay, here we go. I shared the wrong thing, but I'm glad I shared that because I was going to skip over that. But we're having a problem not because we're Christian or because we call ourselves Moors. Some Black people say they're Native American, people all over the place. They don't hate you because of what you call yourself. They hate you because you're Black. This is the great Omawali Malcolm X. This is from the Message to the Grassroots speech. Now, I'm going to put this in context. This is November 10th, 1963, which is interesting because the March on Washington was maybe 4 months previous in August of 1963, just to connect the dots. And JFK is assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. So this is a couple months after the March on Washington and a few weeks before the assassination of JFK on November 22nd, 1963. Let's make sure I share my screen properly. This is Malcolm X talking about Black nationalism.
When you want a nation, that's called nationalism. When the white man became involved in a revolution in this country against England, what was it for? He wanted this land so he could set up another white nation. That's white nationalism.
The American Revolution was white nationalism. The French Revolution was white nationalism. The Russian Revolution, too, yes, it was white nationalism. You don't think so? Why you think Khrushchev and Mao can't get their heads together? White nationalism. All the revolutions that's going on in Asia and Africa today are based on what? Black nationalism. A revolutionary is a black nationalist. He wants a nation. I was reading some beautiful...
A revolutionary is a black nationalist who wants a nation. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of groups of black people, some of whom are fake experts on YouTube. They don't want a nation. They want a more comfortable seat in the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. Listen.
Words by Reverend Cleave pointing out why he couldn't get together with someone else here in the city. Because all of them were afraid of being identified with black nationalism. If you're afraid of black nationalism, you're afraid of revolution. And if you love revolution, you love black nationalism.
Okay, we'll stop it there because I am out of time. I do want to thank everybody that chimed in the chat. Anton Austin always represents. He said actually that Schoolie D on Am I Black in the Foyer used that same piece from Malcolm X on that album. I do have that on vinyl. I have to go back and listen to that. But shout out to Schoolie D. He kind of did do a conscious album at one point. Shout out to Mo Better One who chimed in the chat. Sneed Mobile Tech said Farrakhan, the dishonorable Elijah. I don't know where he was going with that, but I don't know. I think I might agree with where he was going. I'm not going to expound on that because I'm not clear on what he meant when he said that. Rap Kid chimed in the chat. Def Rocker chimed in. Def Rocker actually put some facts in it. Says NOI was a religious movement, but mostly black nationalist movement. The NOI didn't teach from the Quran or the Prophet. Okay, so that's true. So shout out to Def Rocker. I want to give a big up to everybody that joined us in the chat. Azim Shabazz. There was someone that chimed in and said some negativity. We're gonna leave that alone. I put a question out to the Negatrons though. What is the greatest problem we're faced with? I guess he ran. He didn't put any response in the chat. Either way, I want to wish everybody a happy Malcolm X Day, a happy 100th birth anniversary of the great Omar Wally Malcolm X. And shout out to everyone that went on the pilgrimage today to Westchester. If you're in the loop, you know what that is. Either way, shout out to DJ Tiger. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the DJ Tiger channel. And make sure you tell a friend to tell a friend to tell an enemy to check out DJ Tiger. Until next time, people, it's the Fact Project. I'm going to say peace.